Here's a 40-second, high-retention hook crafted for emotional tension, curiosity, and narration delivery, designed to force viewers to stay. I had just unlocked my cabin door when a woman started screaming that I was trespassing. She said the HOA owned this valley now, and I was about to be removed. Before I could answer, she was already on the phone with the cops. 10 minutes later, 3 patrol cars came flying down the gravel road. She stood there smiling, telling them I was illegally occupying HOA land. What she didn't know was that my family never sold this property. I stayed quiet while she demanded my arrest, because sitting in my jacket pocket was a deed that would end the HOA and her control forever. I hadn't planned to come back that weekend. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't a vacation. It was one of those moments when life feels too loud, and you remember there's a place where things still make sense. For me, that place was the cabin. The cabin sits deep in a mountain valley most people don't even know exists. No resorts, no tourist signs, no cell service once you pass the old logging road. My grandfather bought the land in the early 1960s. Back then, nobody wanted it. Too remote, too steep, too quiet. That's why he loved it. He used to say, if you can hear people, you're too close to them. He built the cabin with his own hands. Not fancy, just strong. Logs cut from the land itself. A stone fireplace that still smells like pine when it rains. When he passed, the land went to my father. When my father passed, it came to me. No banks, no mortgages, no contracts with anyone else. Just one deed, one valley, one family. I don't live there full time. I never wanted to. The cabin wasn't meant to be a house. It was meant to be a place you return to when the world starts pulling too hard. I usually went a few times a year, sometimes for a week, sometimes just a weekend. This time, it had been almost a year. My dad's illness took over everything. Hospitals, paperwork, that slow emotional exhaustion you don't even notice until you finally stop. When things settled, I loaded up my truck and drove. The road in is long, 2 hours after the last gas station, then another 40 minutes on dirt. The kind of road where you drive slow, not because you're afraid, but because there's no reason to rush. That's when I saw the sign. It stood right where the valley opens up. Tall, new, clean, white background, green lettering. Welcome to Silver Pine Estates Private HOA Community Authorized Residents Only. I remember braking without thinking. Just instinct. I read it twice. And a third time. HOA. Out here? I laughed under my breath. Not because it was funny. Because it didn't make sense. There had never been an HOA in the valley. There weren't even enough people for one. A few scattered homes. Some seasonal cabins. Most of the land was untouched. I assumed someone bought land on the far end. Developers try every few years. They get excited. Then reality hits. No utilities. No easy access. No profit. They usually disappear. I drove past the sign. The gravel road felt different. Smoother. Recently graded. That caught my attention. For decades, road maintenance had been informal. The handful of us chipped in, or I paid for it when no one else wanted to bother. I made a mental note. Someone had money to burn. When my cabin came into view, I felt that familiar calm. Same clearing, same tree line, same porch facing the creek. I parked and stepped out. The air smelled like wet pine and cold stone. That smell that only exists in places that haven't been overtouched. I stood there longer than I needed to, just breathing. Then I unlocked the door. The inside was exactly how I left it. Wood floors, old furniture, photos on the wall that no one else had seen in years. I set my bag down. That's when I heard footsteps. Not animals, not leaves. Shoes. Firm, purposeful. I turned. A woman was walking up the path like she owned it. Mid-40s maybe. Perfect hair. Designer jacket. Sunglasses pushed up on her head, even though the sun was barely out. She stopped a few feet from me. Didn't smile. Didn't introduce herself. She said, "You can't be here." Not a question. A statement. I honestly thought she was confused. "I'm sorry," I said. She looked past me, at the cabin, like it offended her. "This property is governed by the Silver Pine Estates Homeowners Association," she said. "You're trespassing." That word landed heavy. Trespassing. I glanced around. The trees. The creek. The porch my dad fixed with me when I was 17. This is my cabin, I said. She let out a short laugh. Sharp. Dismissive. No, she said. It isn't. She pulled a clipboard tighter against her chest. I felt something shift in my stomach. That instinct that tells you this isn't a misunderstanding anymore. I asked her who she was. She straightened her shoulders. Linda, she said. HOA president. She said like a badge. Like authority lived in the title itself. I asked how long this HOA had been here. 8 months, she said. Everything is finalized. Finalized? I told her I'd never been notified of any changes. She shrugged. That's not my responsibility. She started pointing at her papers. She talked about zoning, design standards, unauthorized structures. She said my cabin didn't comply. That's when I felt anger for the first time. Not loud anger. Quiet. Cold. I told her this cabin existed before most roads. She said, not under this ownership. I asked her who sold the land. She avoided the question. She said a development group purchased all valley access parcels. That phrasing stuck in my head immediately. Access parcels, not ownership. She told me I had 48 hours to vacate, or she would escalate the matter. I asked what escalation meant. She smiled. You'll find out. Then she turned and walked away. No goodbye. No discussion. Just certainty. I stood there long after she disappeared into the trees. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. Not because it changed, but because someone had tried to take it without even asking. That night, I sat by the fireplace. Listened to the wind move through the valley. I wasn't scared, but I knew one thing for sure. Something had changed. I didn't sleep well that first night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying her words. Silver Pine Estates. HOA president. Finalized. None of it fit with what I knew about the valley. This place had always been quiet. Not just peaceful, but forgotten. You didn't stumble into it. You had to know it existed. I woke up early, before the sun hit the ridge. The cabin was cold, the way it always was in the mornings. I made coffee on the old stovetop, stood on the porch with a mug warming my hands. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Around mid-morning, I heard a truck. Not the kind that belongs out here. Clean. New. It stopped near the tree line. Linda stepped out again. This time, she wasn't alone. A man followed her. Early 30s. Khaki pants. Polo shirt with a small green logo stitched on the chest. Silver Pine Estates. They walked up together, like this was a scheduled meeting. Linda didn't ask if she could come onto the porch. She just did. This is your official notice, she said, handing me a bright orange paper. I glanced at it. Unauthorized occupancy. Violation of HOA covenant. Failure to comply with community standards. There was a fine listed at the bottom. Not small. I looked up at her. I don't recognize your authority, I said. The man in the polo cleared his throat. Sir, we've been instructed to document noncompliance. I asked him if he'd ever been to the county records office. He avoided my eyes. Linda smiled again. That same smile. The one that isn't about happiness. It's about control. She started pointing around. The firewood stack. The generator. My truck. Each one was suddenly a violation. She told me I needed permits. Tags. Approval. I asked her how an HOA could govern land it didn't own. She told me ownership wasn't my concern. That sentence stuck with me. Ownership wasn't my concern. I told her it was. She wrote something down. Before she left, she told me this was my final warning. I watched them drive away. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end with a conversation. Over the next 2 days, the notices kept coming. Sometimes taped to my door. Sometimes stuck under my windshield wiper. Fines. Warnings. Deadlines. All worded in the same cold, official language. Not angry. Not loud. Just constant. I called the number listed on one of the notices. It rang twice. Voicemail. Silver Pine Estates, HOA. Leave a message. I left one. I explained who I was. That my family owned the land. That there was a mistake. No one called back. Instead, Linda showed up again. This time with a sheriff's deputy. Not to arrest me. Not yet. Just to document the situation. The deputy was polite. Calm. Linda wasn't. She talked over me. Used words like refusal and defiance. The deputy asked me if I had proof of ownership. I said I did. Just not with me. He suggested I bring it to the county if things escalated. Linda didn't like that. After they left, I knew I couldn't wait. I drove into town that afternoon. The county records office hadn't changed since I was a kid. Same counters. Same slow ceiling fans. I filled out the request. When the clerk saw the name on the deed, she paused. Then she looked up at me. "You're having trouble with Silver Pine, aren't you?" I asked how she knew. She sighed. "You're not the first." She disappeared into the back. When she returned, she placed a thick stack of papers in front of me. Maps, surveys, original deeds. She pointed to a highlighted section. The valley floor, the access roads, the easements, all under my family's name. Never sold, never transferred. The development group bought land near the valley. Not in it. They built roads where they didn't have permission. Sold homes on assumptions. The HOA was built on paperwork that skipped a very important step. Consent. I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief. Certainty. I thanked the clerk. She told me to keep copies. Multiple. I drove back as the sun dipped low. When I reached the cabin, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt patient, because now I understood something Linda didn't. Power doesn't come from clipboards. It comes from truth. And she had no idea what was coming. Once you know the truth, everything changes. Not on the outside. The trees still stood the same. The creek still ran the same. But inside, I stopped reacting. That was the mistake Linda didn't expect. Most people argue when they're pushed. They get loud. They demand explanations. I didn't. I kept living the same way I always had. I fixed the loose board on the porch. Chopped firewood in the mornings. Took long walks down the valley road. And that seemed to bother her more than anything. Because control only works when the other person acknowledges it. The notices didn't stop. They just got more official. Red ink instead of orange. Legal language. References to sections and clauses. One morning, there was an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a notice of intent to place a lien on my property. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. They were threatening me over land they didn't own. But I also knew this wasn't something I could ignore forever. Not because I was afraid of losing, but because ignoring it would give them room to keep lying. Linda showed up later that day. Alone this time. She walked slower, more deliberate. She didn't smile. She told me the HOA board had voted unanimously. That enforcement would escalate. I asked her who was on the board. She named people I'd never heard of. New homeowners. Recent arrivals. People who trusted paperwork without asking questions. She told me they'd already contacted law enforcement. That caught my attention. I asked her what she told them. She said I was refusing to comply, that I was occupying land without authorization. I asked her if she'd told them about the deed. She stared at me. Then she said, "That document doesn't matter anymore." That's when I realized something important. She believed her own story, not just as a tactic, as truth. People like that are dangerous in quiet ways. They don't think they're doing anything wrong. They think they're restoring order. I asked her one last time if she'd checked the county records. She told me I was wasting her time. Before she left, she said something that stuck with me. "You should have sold when you had the chance." I didn't answer, because the truth was I'd never been offered anything. Not once. That night, I sat with the papers spread out on the table. Maps, lines, boundaries. The valley made sense when you looked at it that way. Everything fed into everything else. Roads existed because the land allowed them. Homes existed because the land allowed them. Ownership wasn't just a title. It was responsibility. And Linda had skipped that part. The next morning, I woke up to engines. Not one. Several. I stepped outside. 2 HOA trucks were parked near the access road. A man with a measuring wheel was walking along the gravel. Another was taking photos. I walked over, asked what they were doing. They told me they were surveying HOA property. I told them to stop. They refused. I told them again. They laughed. That's when I called the sheriff's office myself. I didn't accuse. I didn't complain. I just said there were people on my land without permission. An hour later, a deputy arrived. Different one this time. Calmer. Older. I handed him the deed. He took his time reading it. Then he asked the surveyors for their paperwork. They didn't have anything proving ownership. The deputy told them to leave. Linda arrived shortly after. She was furious. She told the deputy they were authorized. He told her authorization requires ownership. She argued. He didn't. She left shaking. After that, things got quiet. Too quiet. No notices. No visits. Just waiting. That's when I knew she was planning something bigger. Because people like Linda don't stop when they're wrong. They stop when they're exposed. And exposure was coming. I could feel it. The valley always goes quiet before a storm. The quiet didn't last. It never does. When people lose control quietly, they try to take it back loudly. 2 days after the surveyors were sent away, I woke up to the sound of tires on gravel again. Different this time. Heavier. I stepped onto the porch just as the first patrol car came into view. Then a second. Then a third. No lights. No sirens. But there was urgency in the way they parked. Linda's SUV pulled in right behind them. She stepped out like she'd been waiting for this moment. Chin up. Shoulders squared. She didn't look at me at first. She went straight to the officers. I stayed where I was. Hands visible. Calm. I learned a long time ago that yelling never helps when uniforms are involved. One of the officers approached me. Middle-aged. Neutral expression. Sir, we received a call about a trespassing situation. Linda cut in immediately. He's been illegally occupying HOA land, she said. He's refused multiple notices. He's aggressive. Aggressive. I almost laughed. The officer raised a hand to stop her. Sir, he said to me, is this your residence? Yes, I said. It has been for decades. Linda scoffed. That's not accurate, she said. This land belongs to Silver Pine Estates. The officer looked at her. Do you have documentation for that? She nodded quickly. Of course. She handed him a folder. Thick, neatly organized. He flipped through it. Articles. Maps. HOA bylaws. He nodded slowly. Then he looked back at me. Do you have proof of ownership? I didn't answer right away. Not to be dramatic, but because this was the moment. I reached in my jacket and pulled out the folded deed. Handed it to him. He unfolded it carefully. Read the header. Then the description. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He read it again. Then he called another officer over. Linda shifted her weight. This is ridiculous, she said. That document is outdated. The officer didn't respond. The second officer read the deed too. Then he asked me a question Linda clearly didn't expect. How much land does this cover? I pointed down the valley. All of it. The officer walked a few steps away. Made a call. Linda started talking faster. She said the HOA had approvals, that developers had surveys, that the county had signed off. The first officer finally spoke. Ma'am, surveys don't override deeds. Silence. He asked Linda for proof that the land had been sold. She flipped through her folder again. Faster this time. Her confidence started to crack. She pulled out maps. Pointed at lines. These are HOA boundaries, she said. The officer shook his head. These are proposed boundaries. Another call came through on his radio. He listened, nodded. Then he looked at Linda. Ma'am, according to county records, this land is privately owned. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, that can't be right. The officer gestured around. You're standing on his property right now. You can feel it shift. The air, the balance. Linda's face went pale. She started arguing again, louder this time, talking about intent, development rights, future plans. The officer stopped her. This is a civil matter now, he said, but you don't have authority to remove him. She turned to me. This isn't over, she said. I met her eyes. I know, I said, but it ends today. The officers asked Linda to step away. They spoke with her quietly for several minutes. I couldn't hear everything, but I saw the frustration, the realization. When they finished, one of the officers came back to me. You're not in violation, he said. If anyone returns without your permission, call us. I nodded. Linda got into her SUV without another word. No apology, no acknowledgement, just anger. As the patrol cars left, the valley went quiet again. But it was a different quiet. Heavier. Final. That night, I sat on the porch longer than usual. Not celebrating. Thinking. Because I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. The HOA had sold people something they didn't own. And once homeowners realized that, things unravel fast. Linda didn't lose control that day. She lost credibility. And that's something you can't find your way back into. I looked down the valley. At the road. the houses in the distance. And I understood something clearly for the first time. This land wasn't just inherited. It was defended, and the hardest part was still coming. After the patrol cars left, the valley was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you listen to the wind move through the trees. The creek sounded louder, somehow, and every bird call echoed differently. But it wasn't peaceful. Not really. It was heavy with anticipation. Because I knew Linda wasn't going to disappear quietly. People like her never do. Over the next few days, the emails and letters started again. This time, more frantic, less formal, almost pleading. They were still trying to enforce fines, still trying to push homeowners to acknowledge HOA authority. But there was one problem. Every single one of their claims could be disproven with a single signature from the county. I had learned to stay calm. Patience was my ally. Every visit she made, every note she left, every phone call she placed to homeowners or officials, it was all ammunition for what would come. I kept track of every interaction, every date, every claim, every threat. I wasn't obsessed. I was documenting reality, because reality was on my side. A week later, a few of the newer homeowners approached me. "We didn't know," one said quietly. "I thought we had to follow HOA rules." I nodded. "Rules don't mean anything if they're built on lies," I said. "They only work if the land is legally under someone's authority." That's not the case here. The relief on their faces was immediate. Some even apologized for blindly trusting Linda. I didn't dwell on it. I let it sink in. Meanwhile, Linda tried another tactic. She started calling the county, the surveyors, even local attorneys, demanding recognition, requesting documentation, trying to rewrite history. The county officials were polite but firm. They told her the deeds were clear. Ownership hadn't changed, and any enforcement action by the HOA without consent would be illegal. She was running out of options. Then, slowly, homeowners began questioning her publicly. Board meetings that were supposed to be confidential started leaking. People demanded evidence of property transfers. They discovered the developer who sold her authority had no legal standing. The entire HOA foundation began to crumble. Linda started showing up less frequently. Her confident strides turned hesitant. Her clipboard felt heavier. One day, I watched from the porch as she drove away. The truck disappeared behind the ridge, and she never returned. Weeks later, the HOA officially dissolved. No press, no fanfare, just paperwork filed with the county. The roads that she claimed were community property officially transferred back to me. All the unauthorized signs she had put up were removed. All fines and liens she tried to place, voided. Homeowners who had been intimidated found relief. They apologized. Some even thanked me for standing firm. But I didn't celebrate, because this wasn't about winning. It was about restoring balance. The valley had always been mine. It belonged to my family first, and no amount of rules, fines, or arrogance could change that. That night, I walked along the creek, watched the sun set behind the ridge. The water reflected pink and gold streaks. Everything felt as it always had, quiet, untouched, right? I thought about Linda, not with anger, not with revenge, but with the kind of understanding that comes when someone loses by simply being wrong. She had tried to assert control over a place she didn't own. She believed her authority was absolute. But authority built on lies and misunderstanding doesn't last. Karma didn't yell. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It unfolded quietly. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to wait. And the valley did the rest. It's strange, the way life sometimes corrects itself. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with quiet certainty. The HOA was gone. Linda was gone. And the cabin, my cabin, was safe. Safe in the way a home should be. I repaired the porch boards, stacked firewood for the winter, watched the creek flow. The valley breathed around me, just as it had before anyone tried to control it. I didn't tell anyone the full story at first, not because I was hiding it, because some things are better lived than explained. The people who witnessed the events firsthand knew the truth. Neighbors who came by understood the peace that returned, and new homeowners learned what it meant to respect someone else's property. It became a quiet lesson, passed along without drama. No one had to shout. No one had to call lawyers. No one had to make threats. The truth was enough. The deed in my jacket pocket was enough. And Linda learned, eventually, that control is nothing without legitimacy. I watched the valley slowly settle back into its natural rhythm. Birds returned to familiar nests. The creek ran with the same steady pulse. The trees swayed without interruption. I sat on the porch for hours that week, thinking about balance. How easily it can be disturbed. How slowly it returns. And I realized something I hadn't thought about before. Owning land isn't about possession. It's about responsibility. It's about protecting what's yours without harming what belongs to others. And when someone tries to take that responsibility from you, no amount of rules, fines, or intimidation can replace the quiet power of truth. I never sought revenge. I never needed to. The valley corrected itself. And in that quiet correction, I found something far more satisfying than anger or triumph. Peace. A place where generations before me had lived. And a place where generations after me could continue without interference. That, more than anything else, was worth protecting. And it was mine. The days after Linda disappeared were strange. Not because I expected her to come back. I knew she wouldn't. But because everything I had been waiting for, the final acknowledgement of ownership, the quiet settling of the valley, suddenly felt real. For years, this place had been my refuge. Decades, really. A cabin that had seen my grandfather build it from scratch, my father repair it, and now me, tending it in silence. And now, finally, it was mine in every sense, not just on paper, but in practice. I spent the first morning after the HOA dissolved walking the valley roads. I looked at the lines of trees, the open meadows, the creek cutting its way through the land. Everything was untouched, undisturbed, exactly as it should be. I thought about what had happened, not with anger, not with frustration, but with clarity. Linda had been wrong in the simplest way. She had tried to wield authority that wasn't hers. She had tried to impose rules on people who didn't consent over land that didn't belong to her, in a place that had never been hers to govern. She had believed in her own version of power so strongly that she didn't see the truth. And the truth, as I had discovered, has a way of correcting itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It just unfolds. The county records, the deeds, the maps, these were simple, factual, irrefutable. They didn't care about HOA bylaws, board votes, or deadlines. They just were. And because of that, the valley had set itself right. Over the next few weeks, life returned to normal. Neighbors who had been intimidated by the HOA came forward quietly. Some offered apologies. Some shared stories about how Linda had pressured them. Some even asked if I would help them understand the boundaries, the surveys, and what they could and couldn't do. I didn't mind. I spent my mornings walking the property with them, pointing out where the lines were, explaining the history of the land, showing them the old cabin photos my grandfather and father had left behind. It felt good, in a slow, steady way, to share knowledge without asserting dominance. To show people that respect and truth are stronger than intimidation. The cabin itself needed work. Years of neglect, and my long absence had left its mark. The stone fireplace had a crack. A few roof shingles were loose. The deck railing had rotted slightly. I spent long days repairing it all. I took my time. No rush. No interruptions. I realized, as I worked, that this was the real reward. The act of caring for something you love, protecting it, and ensuring it would last. Linda had tried to take it away with rules, threats, and assumptions. She had tried to rewrite reality. But the real work, quiet, patient, respectful work, was always mine. Always had been. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch, looking down the valley toward the homes that had been sold under her HOA's guidance. Some were new. Some were just being finished. All built without permission to infringe on my property. I felt no anger. No desire for revenge. Instead, I felt satisfaction. Not the shallow kind that comes from winning a fight, but the deep, calm kind that comes from knowing you stood firm in the truth. I thought about Linda again, not with malice, but with understanding. She had been confident, assertive, certain of her power, and that confidence had nearly caused a lot of people to follow her blindly. But ultimately, when the truth surfaced, her authority collapsed. Karma, in its quiet way, had done what I never needed to do myself. I realized, too, that this valley wasn't just a piece of land. It was a teacher. It had taught patience. It had taught the importance of documentation, of calm, of understanding the difference between rules and truth. I spent the next weeks cataloging everything. The deeds, the surveys, the interactions with Linda and the HOA. Emails, letters, photographs. Everything was stored carefully in a fireproof box. Not to gloat, not for revenge, but for peace of mind. Because someday, someone else might try to challenge the history, the truth, or the ownership. And when that day came, I wanted certainty. Life slowly returned to rhythm. The creek ran as it had for decades. Birds nested in the same trees. The cabin, repaired and warm, became a place to breathe again. And the neighbors? They started to approach me not with fear, but with respect. Some shared stories of similar HOA pressures elsewhere. Some asked advice. Some even became friends. I realized that being calm, patient, and factual, rather than aggressive or vengeful, had not only protected the valley, but also changed the community. Linda's shadow faded, and I didn't need to do anything to make it happen. The real work had been living correctly, documenting truth, and standing firm. Eventually, I wrote down the story of those few weeks. The confrontation, the threats, the officers, the HOA's collapse. Not for YouTube, not for anyone else, just for me. Just to remember how fragile order can be when it's built on lies, and how strong it can be when it rests on truth. I never returned to the county again. I didn't need to. The valley had spoken. Linda's power was gone. The HOA was gone. And the land, the cabin, the creek, the meadows was mine. Not because I fought, not because I threatened, not because I sought revenge, but because I respected it. I protected it, and I never stopped believing in the truth. On the last morning of that year, I stood on the porch as the first snow began to fall. The flakes drifted slowly through the tall pines. The creek's water didn't freeze yet. It just flowed, steady and quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep, calm happiness. Not excitement, not relief, but something deeper. A sense that justice, balance, and patience sometimes don't need to shout. They just need to exist. And in that quiet, I understood the real lesson of the valley. Ownership isn't about possession. Power isn't about rules. Control isn't about fear. It's about care, responsibility, and the courage to stand by the truth, no matter how long it takes. Linda would never understand that, but the valley did, and that was enough. The cabin, the creek, the trees, all of it was mine again. And for the first time in decades, I knew it would stay that way.